So, Alexis, you were the cinematographer on the Florida project. Uh, this movie has gotten great reviews from critics, and audiences really love it. Why do you think people have had such a strong reaction to the movie?
I think the connection and the empathy that this movie brings about in people is kind of its strong point. Um, and also, I think there's also something in the visual language that just a very poppy film that is I don't know if it just I think it's helpful for people to relate to that, when people can relate to the culture and the music and the reality of it all, in ways. Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about your visual approach to the movie. I mean, what were your initial ideas for it?
So we wanted to really see this story through the eyes of children. So it's kind of like the challenge was to really, lose our. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
We wanted to really kind of like forget about seeing the world through our eyes and get back into our children's eyes and really kind of see the way in a more naive, way, or in a more innocent way, I guess is a better word. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we kind of wanted to enhance reality a little bit. We wanted to keep, I guess, the crudeness of their as a bottom layer, but then all of that is just like it's not really what you're focusing on the colors, on of the Florida landscape, on the beautiful, on the funky kind of architecture, and kind of like this almost like this kind of reality that's almost like an amusement park, and sort of kind of bring reality a little step up, a little bit. And a little enhanced reality, if you want to name it that way. And then we also kind of like had, usually a very low camera. So kind of like staying at the height of children and really seeing the world through their eyes. That was basically a challenge. And yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, like you say, there's a heightened reality to it. There's also sort of a, it's like a neo-realism to it as well. I mean, you're dealing with, in a sense, like trying to, I guess, capture reality while at the same time having a sort of fantastical reality, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, exactly. It totally does. That was really basic. That was a lot of our conversation about how to have one foot in fantasy and one foot on reality, and then just walk that line all through the movie.
Mhm.
So is that when people finish the movie, they'll there'll still be a little bit of a lingering doubt about whether this was fantasy, this was real.
Mhm.
And I don't know. I think we managed to walk that line in a pretty good way. Yeah.
The film is filled with so many lush, bright colors. I mean, things like purple skies and obviously the building itself is very bright. Can you talk a little bit about how you went about achieving this kind of bold color scheme for the movie?
I mean, already Florida like offers that, to you. Florida is a bold color scheme in itself, and so it became more about picking and choosing the right places, and kind of like, I think everybody did an amazing job. Fernando with the wardrobe, and Stefanik with a production design to keep this in a very colorful palette, but that at the same time feels harmonious and almost like a movie about a princess, but in the 21st century, Florida landscape.
Mhm. Talk a little bit about, I mean, you mentioned from a child's point of view, and I mean, the film does kind of keep things on that level. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, when you're a kid, you don't really focus on the negative. You tend to focus more on the positive, on the beauty of things. Life is, it's like an open book for you, and so it's just discovering. So we really wanted to get into that mindset. The tools we use is usually a camera angle that's very close to the height of the children. It became almost like this Charlie Brown thing where adults are sometimes just legs or arms coming into frame. And then, well, we did some technical also use of certain tools to like enhance the palette just ever so slightly, you know, and kind of create a separation of the, you know, between skin tones and the background. And so that things feel just ever so slightly off, you know, but still very real, but then ever so slightly off from reality as well.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I think that was basically it. You know, just really every scene that we approached was okay. You know, we're looking at this through Moonee's eyes. We're looking at this through Christopher's eyes. You know, we're looking at this through Valeria's eyes. You know, and that was the main leading idea behind the movie.
Were there any films or other sources that you drew visual inspiration from?
You know, I think that the reference. I mean, the only reference we really had was Florida. The Little Rascals. You know, that was basically it. You know, but visually, I think, you know, we really wanted to create a universe from what you know, Florida and Kissimmee and that part of the country was offering. You know, there weren't really any visual references. We kind of wanted to just kind of create our reality from what reality was offering. You know, and it was a very, very, very organic, you know, kind of process between us all. You know, to really like make things, you know, tight and for things to make sense.
Talk a little bit about working with Shawn Baker. What is that collaboration like between you two?
Oh wow! I mean, I have great respect for Shawn. He really has an amazing balance as a director of you know, keeping a very clear vision, but at the same time being very open and very receptive to what, you know, the key crew has, you know, has to offer and to give to the project. You know, so you know, I find that very admirable. You know?
Mhm. The film, spoiler alert, there's a scene where they run off in the end to Disneyland. I wonder, I mean, how did you go about getting that scene done? How did you go about shooting that scene?
So that was challenging. It was very, very, it was a scene that we tried to make it work in other ways. You know, we looked at other amusement parks and see if we could make them seem like Disneyland, whatnot. In the end, you know, we realized we really had to get in there, and the only way to get in there was a little guerrilla style undercover work. You know, Shawn obviously worked with the iPhone on Tangerine, and then we shot another short film shortly before we shot the movie that we worked with iPhones as well, and I guess because of the you know, the way, you know, cell phones these days are, you know, you don't notice it anymore. People barely notice it. So it was just the right tool for that. We also had an anamorphic adapter for the iPhone, which allowed us to work within the same visual landscape as a 35 millimeters. And so we just, you know, we disguised ourselves as a family, went into Disneyland, and shot the final scenes there. We're also looking to kind of just visually create a little bit of a difference between that sequence and the rest of the film, just because we wanted to keep it a little ambiguous as to in what universe that scene is happening, whether it's an imaginary universe or a real universe. You know, we didn't want to make it 100% clear. We just wanted to make it a little bit open to interpretation and a little bit open to a more poetic, I guess, bring it to a more poetic landscape or universe. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that, and you know, I thought the same thing as I was watching the film. You know, for one thing, they probably had to run about 30 miles to get to Disneyland. So there was, but I mean, what do you think happens to Moonee after the film is over? Have you given that much thought at all, or?
Well, yeah. I mean, to me, it is kind of in a poetic, and it's still kind of in it's in her mind. It's you know, it's kind of like this when harsh reality is setting on them, you know, with such violence and such force. You know, I think her only retreat, or their only retreat, is into the imaginary.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I see it. But I do like to keep it open, you know, also because it is also a story, and and you know, stories also have happy endings, you know. So even if it's in the imaginary, doesn't matter. It's still kind of like a happy, it's a happy end as well. There's that duality to the ending. It's a harsh and happy end. Yeah.
And also, I mean, as we talked about earlier, there's this sort of mix of neorealism and magical realism to the film. So
exactly.
Besides that one, I mean, was there a scene that was particularly difficult for you to shoot from a visual standpoint? I mean, something that you and Shawn had a hard time coming up with exactly how to frame or anything like that?
I think it was a very, very organic process. The whole creative process of the film was super organic, and it was very much alive. The script that we started shooting and the script that we ended shooting have, pretty strong differences, and the story was evolving as we were shooting it. And so within that organic process, which we all kind of, just flowed into it, it was just, I don't know, it was a very instinctive or very intuitive way to approach the storytelling. We would block the scenes out, then, we had an idea of how we wanted to shoot it, but, we'd block the scenes out and then had a small discussion and figured if we went this way, this other road. It was never really hard to shoot this movie, and we didn't even have that luxury. We couldn't afford to actually make it hard because we had very little time to shoot the film. We're working with children that had limited working hours, so it was actually just about doing it and shooting it and just like not overthinking it at all. Just basically just going out and doing what we had to do and really trusting our instinct, trusting our intuition, and and doing it.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, it was great. Very, 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 very freeing. It's just a very freeing creative process.
I was going to ask, I mean, since you're working on a limited budget and a limited schedule, I mean, what does that do for you creatively? And what are some of the, I guess, tricks of the trade to make something look that good on such a tight budget and schedule?
I think that we always work within certain limits. That's part of the reality. Whatever you do, whether you have 100 million or 10 million, you're always going to have limitations. So I guess my philosophy is always to make the best you can within the limitations that the reality is imposing. And if you approach, I think just approaching the subject matter and approaching the project with just an open heart and open mind, and that, and just being receptive to what reality has to offer, that's enough. That's enough to make, to create beautiful images and to, create some level of poetry and some level of realism and some level of, all the different degrees of reality that kind of layer themselves on this movie.
And what are you working on next? What's next for you?
Oh, good question. There's a few things maybe happening, but probably a little film shooting in Puerto Rico and post-Hurricane Puerto Rico coming up very shortly. Yeah.
Well, I certainly look forward to it. Alexis, thank you so much. Congratulations on the film.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thank you very much, for this whole conversation.
Of course. Have a good one.